Now I would like to introduce today's speaker, David Thornton. David is an assistant professor in the Mathematical Computing and Information Sciences Department at Jacksonville State University. He developed the game developer concentration in the department. Along with that, David has hosted several game-making workshops for instructors from community colleges and high schools, as well as students ranging from middle and high school. David received his PhD in computer science from Auburn University, and some of his research interests include gamification, human-computer interaction, and other game-inspired pedagogy. So we have a great expert today to walk us through incorporating gamification into your curriculum. I know David's very excited. I know all of you on the call are very excited. So we're going to welcome David now to walk us through incorporating gamification into your classroom. David?
Okay, everybody. Well, welcome, first of all. Thank you all for being here. It's very gratifying to see the crowd that we have. I hope that the time here will be useful for you, so I'll try not to waste anybody's time or chase too many rabbits, but we'll start here at the beginning. Gamification is a term that has really made the rounds lately, especially in the last few years, and has become a more popular movement. So gamification, simply speaking, here it is on the slide, it is the use of game design elements in non-game context. Now, usually, most of you are probably here because you are interested in gamification in relation to your curriculum. So a lot of people, when I say we're going to use games to help people learn, they envision Super Mario Brothers or Pac-Man or what have you being played in the course. So they imagine students are playing games. And that is one thing that you can do to teach. You can use educational games. You can also make games in a course. If you have a programming course especially, learning to make games is a great way to learn to do that. But what I'm talking about today is neither of those. It is not playing games, and it is not making games either. What we mean is that the course itself is game-like. And that has a lot of different attributes and the categories that we're talking about to make it that way. But shortly, we're not making a first-person shooter. We're not making a role-playing game or any other puzzle game, what have you. We're just taking qualities which are common to all games and adding them to a curriculum that already exists. So our coined phrase for that is gamagogy, in case you're wondering how that ridiculous word is pronounced. Gamagogy being game-based pedagogy. So simply marrying the best things about games that make students learn and keep learning, or make them keep playing, and use them to keep them learning instead. So the next slide feels almost unnecessary because I believe that most people who are at this presentation already recognize the prevalence of video games in society. Games are played by everyone of all ages and of all types, so all demographics play games, and they may take them by different names. I mean, even a crossword puzzle is a type of game, or Sudoku. So then digital games in specific, however, have many, many players. You could think of things like Farmville or the more recent Candy Crush. Who hasn't received a Candy Crush invitation? World of Warcraft was a real commercial juggernaut, very successful, millions of players. So World of Warcraft, that is WoW. Back when it was at its peak, people were playing it for 22 hours a week on average, which is a shocking number. I mean, that's a part-time job. In comparison, you know, we say that students should, outside of class, be working so many hours per contact hour, but in comparison, their hours are more like about 14 hours a week, and that's really a little on the, you know, generous side. So games are popular. How can we borrow the best things from them and put them into a course? Well, here are some aspects of gamification. And some of these terms may be very familiar to you, and others may be completely from scratch and even confusing. But I think that we'll cover all of them as we go. So just looking over them briefly, a leaderboard, I think everybody understands roughly what that is. I'll be showing you a picture of it soon. Points is the idea that instead of giving students grades, you give them points. And it's really a pretty subtle difference, to tell the truth. XP in this case is short for experience points, which is a very common bit of verbiage for most gamers. So that instead of getting an A, B, C, D, or F, or a certain number of points, 1 through 100, they gain points in the course. And what that means is that their grade is always going up, much like in a standard old video game or even a pinball machine. Their score continues to rise and rise, rather than making an A on the first assignment and then making an F on the next and feeling like they're going down. Their score is always increasing. Leveling is just a way of trying to give some quantitative categorization to a student's progress. So then once they gain a certain number of points, they graduate to a new level. Sometimes that's done with titles, and I'll show you an example of that soon. Achievements or trophies, these are just milestones that students can hit that will get them some bit of appreciation. Similar to badges as well, if you're familiar with that. Loot is something that the player or student, in this case, can spend, something that they gain while working in the course that they can use. So again, we'll come back to that. But instant feedback is one that I think makes sense to everyone. Instant feedback, students want it, and as instructors, we wish that we could give it to them. Sometimes grading a very difficult assignment may take us a long time, but as much as possible, we would love to give students the immediate feedback that they need so that they can change their behavior and so that they are not bored. Clearly defined work reward cycles, students need to know what they're going to get when they complete certain assignments. So they need to know what the reward is going to be. Social elements can work for some courses. It depends on your course. You may require them to work individually, and this may be less amenable. But as much as possible, if you can use social elements, students will learn a lot that way, and they can be awfully motivated by working in groups. Boss battles, this will come up when we start talking about mastery learning. So I'm going to save that for a few slides from now. I want to show you some examples of gamification in some pretty popular contexts. I think everybody will remember a few years ago, Microsoft Office came out with a new interface. And in it they used the ribbon metaphor. When they did that, a lot of people were up in arms because it changed so drastically that they had lost all they knew. They knew how to get a table of contents or change the number of columns in a page, and all of a sudden the interface had changed very much. So Microsoft decided they had to have a way to motivate people to learn the new interface. So they came out with this game called Ribbon Hero, and it was added to Microsoft Office. When they logged in, it would give you various challenges. So you see one of those shown here. And each time they completed what was basically a tutorial session, they would earn points, and they would see their score in relation to other people's so that they could get some challenges here. So hopefully, I'm not sure exactly what the results were from Microsoft, but the idea was to try to get people to learn how to use their interface. And I've labeled a few things here that we talked about earlier. Okay, another one here that's a very popular one is Calorie Count. And here you see instant feedback. As soon as you have eaten an apple, you can put that into the system and it tells you how well you're doing. You see very clear analysis of how things are going. You can see instant reward feedback so that if you eat something good, this changes to a positive, and otherwise you see a little bit of denigration if you choose a poor food. Now I'm going to tell a slightly embarrassing anecdote here that sold me on the possibilities of gamification techniques. With Calorie Count, one particular day I was using this app, and I had actually eaten pretty well that day, unusually well. I'd had my salad, I drank the water, I did all the things I was supposed to do. And you can see there at the bottom right that there is a progress bar for each of the things that you eat. So the major nutrients, in this case carbs, protein, fats, etc., are listed. And in every category, I had green instead of red, except for one, which was potassium. Now, can you guess what I did next? If you guessed that I ate a banana, you are correct. And honestly, it was pretty silly because nobody else was even looking at this app. Nobody was grading me on it. The computer doesn't care because the computer's a computer. And yet, to change that little progress bar from red to green, I ate a banana. And that was one of the moments where I thought the gamification techniques added onto a course, if it can change my behavior, then surely it can change a student's behavior as well. Here is another gamification app, Fitocracy. You can see that as you complete various activities like doing so many push-ups or what have you, you gain points. You ascend levels, as you can see at the top right. There's also social elements on the left where you can talk to other players and do things like trash talk or praise someone for doing well. There's a leaderboard that lets you know how you're doing in comparison to your compatriots. So all of these things are being done very well here. The last one in this group, which is, I must say, my personal favorite, just because it's so whimsical, is Chore Hero. And in this one, a family might complete various chores. As you can see examples here, cooking dinner, ironing clothes. And each of these have certain point values so that everyone wants to keep up and wants to compete. Hopefully this makes your son or daughter also want to fold the clothes when they come out of the dryer so that they can stay ahead of you on the leaderboard. And you can see near the bottom right there's a title associated. So you not only have levels, but you also have titles. In this case, Susan is the chore leader. There are a lot of people who are big proponents of gamification. I just want to talk about a few of the bigger names that you may run into when you're reading papers on this subject. James Paul G is a really good example. He has done a lot of research on this subject, and I'll talk a bit about some of his points that he believes education and gaming have in common. Lee Sheldon is a professor of, in fact, he teaches game design like myself. He's put out some books on incorporating gamification in your course. Paul Anderson, he is, I believe, a biology teacher in Montana, something science, maybe biology. And in 2011, he was awarded Teacher of the Year for his innovative teaching techniques. In fact, he did a TED Talk on gamification recently. And Quest to Learn is another big one. This is actually a school, an experimental school in New York that teaches 4th through 8th graders using games. And so then they do a little bit broader sense than what I originally mentioned on that first slide, was that sometimes gamification might mean making games or playing games as well, and they do all three of those. So that's Quest to Learn. This particular slide is pretty dense, but I do want to gloss over some of the bigger parts of it. This is by James Paul G. And in it, he mentions certain elements that good games and good education have in common. So if I can go through these just very briefly, I won't talk about them too long, but one of them is co-design. And that simply means that learners need to feel like active agents rather than just passive recipients. They need to have some sense of control over their learning experience. Customization is pretty closely coupled with that. The idea that different learning styles work for different people, so that the students should be allowed to learn in the way that is best for them. Identity is about a student immersing themselves in the course and taking on an identity that matters. So for instance, if a student were in a science class, you want a 4th grader or any student to take on the idea that they are a scientist. Or if it is a programmer that you want to become a software engineer one day, you want them to take on the persona of a software engineer. Manipulation, he says that with education as with good games, humans feel empowered when they can manipulate powerful tools that extend their area of effectiveness. So there's an idea here that we sort of extend our consciousness into the tools that we use. Any educator can understand the next one, well-ordered problems. I think that's one of the absolute holy grails of a good, well-designed course, is ordering your problems well so that students can have an on-ramp into learning, that they can jump over small gaps from what they know to what they need to know. And that's just something, it's very similar to scaffolding. It's the same idea. Pleasantly frustrating problems is all about making sure that the challenge for the students and their ability grow together. Cycles of expertise means that students often go from being a novice to an expert. And then you cover a new concept and they start as novices again. And they become experts, novice to expert, over and over again. And what that means is that from their past successes, they know that they can complete the next part. They have no fear. Just-in-time and on-demand information means that you don't tell students something way ahead of the time before they're going to need to use it. How many times have we been asked in a class, when are we ever going to use this? Fish tanks and sandboxes are closely related. They're the idea that when we work in a course, oftentimes we have to abstract out certain information just because the real world is a little bit too messy. And if we can make the world safe and simplified that they study, they can grasp the major elements that make a particular concept work. Skills as strategies has a lot to do with what we talked about before, which is when are we ever going to use this? It's important for students to understand how what they're learning is connected to what they're really doing. Systems thinking is about finding the big picture. And lastly, meaning as action image is, again, might be best summarized as don't show me, don't tell me, but show me. So making students actually complete actions to learn well. So these are all things that a good educator does, and that if you teach courses, you probably have had thoughts about all of these, but that a game does very well also, and that's one of the reasons that he believes that games have the opportunity to improve education when they can be married. Also from self-determination theory, we know that motivational human experiences have certain characteristics, and some of them are competence, autonomy, and relatedness. What that means simply is that we have to be able to gain mastery in a thing, and that is what games do very well, and also a good course does. Autonomy, which is similar to our talking about customization and identity. The social elements, of course, is another one that we all understand. Csikszentmihalyi, this is a psychologist back even, I think, as far as the 50s or 60s, he was studying the concept of flow. And this is closely related to pleasantly frustrating problems. The chart that you see on the right is showing the X and Y of skill level and challenge level. Naturally, we want the skill of the learner to increase at the same rate as the challenge. If we make things too hard too fast, then you see that we get into things like arousal, anxiety, and eventually worry because they are just overwhelmed. But if it's too easy, then they go into eventually control, but then further down into relaxation, boredom, and apathy, which we don't want either. So we want to get that optimal path for students. Well, how can we do that? Well, that's my next topic, which is how are games able to give students that progress just the right amount? It's very close to something that's been around for a long time called mastery learning. Mastery learning has been around for a long time. And in fact, many of you as educators probably have heard of it. And it's taken different names over the years, and there have been very similar models, such as the Keller Plan or the Personalized System of Instruction, that are all about making sure that students can learn at their own pace and in their own style. According to a lot of studies, it's a very good approach. And it's very similar to, again, pleasantly frustrating problems or flow in that the challenge and the skill of the student are meant to grow together. I think the best way to summarize it is with this picture. We give self-paced learning to a student. We give them some instruction, followed by some form of an assessment. Now, if they pass that assessment, they're ready to move on to the next level. But if they do not, then they have to go back around through cycles of remediation or corrective activities. Now, there's some variance in how we approach this. Some educators will have a version of the assessment that they can take multiple times. Others may go as far as to say that they can take that particular assessment unlimited times. They can retake it, retake it, retake it until they're ready to move on to the next bit. And so then the more advanced students who either have more aptitude or more training are able to move ahead more quickly than their compatriots. What's the problem with this? Well, you can probably imagine. If you give students the ability to move at their own pace without any other form of motivation, then their pace is probably going to be pretty slow. Similarly, if I let one student get ahead of another, then how can I manage them in the classroom? Whether it's virtual or whether it's in person, how can I give them experiences? What lecture do I give this day? What piece of content do I release if I can't manage two different levels of progress or more? The last thing is that if we allow students to take assessments and we say you can take this assessment as many times as you want, they may mindlessly spam the assessment, meaning that they may be watching a television show while also choosing something in the multiple choice or true-false test that we have for them, and they may be able to defeat it without actually ever learning anything. So we have to be careful about how we do that. The goal in the end is that mastery learning is a great approach, but it has some weaknesses. And what we would really like is to marry the best parts of gamification with mastery learning to yield good results, because gamification, one of its best qualities, when it works, is that it increases student motivation. One other thing I want to talk about before I get to this slide is I mentioned Paul Anderson, who got the Teacher of the Year award. In fact, if you look up on YouTube or on the TED Talks, you can find his talks on gamification. Now, the only problem with his approach is that a great deal of it was done in a rather manual way, meaning that he would show an Excel spreadsheet that he was using to keep up with student points and student levels, and then he would have to deliver that and change it by hand. What we want is something that can be as instant as possible with as little actual overhead and work as possible. Honestly, to look at what he did, it was brilliant, but it was so much time that not many educators are willing to replicate that in their classroom. If educators are going to use gamification and sort of put a toe into the pool to try it out, then they want to do it with the lowest possible barrier. So to do that, we need to use technology to solve the problem. In fact, we were talking about mastery learning and the personalized system of instruction. I had one of the old books in the library from the 1960s, and it had a really funny quote, which is only funny to us now when we have technology, but it said, if only there was some way, some computerized technology that would allow us to offer adaptive learning so that once a student could get a question right or wrong, they would see a different result. And now, of course, that's so easy for us that at that time it would have just been impossible. So the promise of technology to solve some of these problems and make gamification easier is a really great thing. So we want to make it so that that the educator has very little work to do, and that the students can get really quick feedback. Blackboard has done this really well with certain tools, and so I've got them listed here. Adaptive release is excellent, and it allows us to produce a graph very similar to what I talked about with mastery learning, where we can have those cycles of expertise and those formative and summative assessments. Question pools help us get around the spamming issue in that if we have a large set of questions and they can be picked out of a large list each time, then it's more difficult for students to mindlessly take the particular assessment over and over again. The achievements block is actually something that Jarl is going to talk about here after my particular talk, but I must say it is an excellent tool. It's really well designed, so I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that as well. Two of them which have been made here at JSU are leaderboards and what we call either the quest path or learning map, and I'll give a little plug to those two items here in just a moment here. So the first one you see here is the leaderboard block. So this is something we made, and this is something that you and any other educator who wants it can get on Project Ocelot, which is where a lot of Blackboard third-party tools are hosted. So this is available to educators for free. Once it's installed by an administrator, instructors can put this into their course in about 10 seconds. And you see two different views here, which is what the students see, which is, as you can tell, anonymized because obviously FERPA and some other issues which we just can't show other people's grades. But the teacher can see the particular student's names. which is a really helpful view just to kind of get a sense of how the class is doing. If you do have a nice linear set of bars here, then you can tell that you've got a decent bell curve going because everyone is at, gracefully going from top to bottom. But otherwise, sometimes you might see a dichotomy where the top 4 students are way far ahead, and you may have 3 or 4 who are complete stragglers with a stair step in between. So it's a really nice way to get a quick glance of how things are going. One thing that we hope for with something like this is that especially competitive students are going to be more motivated by this particular gamification approach. One thing that we have seen in our courses, and this is being used not only here at JSU, but also in about 8 or 9 other schools across the U.S. that we know of, and also in the UK and Australia. So we're very gratified that people are using it. But the nice thing that we see is that students will complete an assignment in Blackboard and then log back into their home page to see that they have jumped from 9th place to 7th place. And they do the fist bump, they get excited, and that's a really good moment. One feature we're adding to this particular block soon is, like you see here, this may be a little bit too small a text to see clearly on your screen, but we can add custom titles. So in this case with programming, they may ascend from keyboard masher to system admin over the course of a few weeks. Okay, another one of our blocks here that we made, which again is freely available and we would love for educators to use, and it takes almost no time to install, is the quest path block. What this does, this actually leverages, it sits atop the adaptive release features which are built into Blackboard already. And this gives you a visual sense of how your adaptive release works. And students, this is what the student view looks like. As they pass particular assignments, it will turn green. The ones that have to work on currently are in a sort of yellow color, and as the ones that are presently still locked are in gray. So they can actually click on these assignments and start them just like they would normally in Blackboard. This is the instructor view. With the instructor view, we can get a quick overview of how the class as a whole is doing. The more saturated a particular node is, that means that more students have successfully completed it, while the paler means that it is less completed. So assignment 1.1 you can see is very far towards saturated and is probably close to 90 to 100% complete, while assignment 1.5 has either been tried by no one or just a little bit. And if you need more information than that, you can actually click on a particular node in the path, and you will see something like this. So the point here about this particular block is that rather than students receiving a syllabus for the course, which has an outline for all the concepts they're going to cover, instead of seeing it in a tabular format, they can see a connected graph like this one that goes from day 1 until the end, and they can see how all the different concepts relate to one another. They can actually see the scaffolding that you have in mind, and hopefully that is a thing that can help them understand how well they're doing and give them a sense of what still needs to be done. Okay, so in the end, what we would like the home page in Blackboard to look like for you is something like this. Now you may only want to use one of these blocks. You may want to use a whole bunch of them in a suite. You may want to combine this with the achievements block as well. And really, I just encourage educators to use as much of this as they can, because I believe there is a certain amount of synergy between these. Rather than just doing one, you may want to jump in a whole hog. But if not, then I would say a good place to start is the achievements block, and the leaderboard block are a great way to get a sense of whether your students will respond to this particular kind of treatment. What you see on the right there, just quickly, is this is a block that is currently in development, which is the avatar block, with the idea being that students, as they complete assignments, they would earn new items to personalize their character with, and also they could see other students and compete with them to a certain degree. So this is where the rubber meets the road. If you want to do gamification in your course, there are certain things you want to do to your curriculum to make it work. One of them is dividing your coursework into groups and allowing students to only work on or only see the content that they currently have the level for. So in our case, we had in our programming course, we've used this for several semesters, we broke our concepts that we would normally cover in the first 3 weeks into level 1. The next 3 weeks, level 2. The next 3 weeks, level 3, and you see where we're going. So then students could see a little bit ahead. They could see up to 3 weeks ahead of where we currently were lecturing in course and what we were currently working on in the lab. But they couldn't see too far ahead. And once they had mastered those particular assignments, once they had gotten enough points to ascend to level 2, then they could see all the assignments and projects that were associated with level 2. And so what we're talking about there is some sort of, those points that they had earned were a sort of formative assessment similar to mastery learning. To go very far back to our first slide, when we talked about boss battles, a boss battle in a game is really the exact same thing as an assessment in mastery learning, something that they have to pass through to get to the next bit. Multiple learning paths goes close to James Paul G's content idea of customization, which is that we may want to cover the same concept, but we could do it with multiple different types of assignments. And giving students those choices makes them not only feel empowered, but also caters well to the way that they want to learn it. One thing that games do well is learning how to motivate you psychologically. And one of those mechanics is geometric rewards. In other words, nonlinear rewards. Rewards which are greater than linear or less than linear. So something is exponential or logarithmic. So one thing we've experimented with in attendance, for instance, with our 230 class, with our CS 230, I apologize, our programming course, is that we awarded them points for attendance. And usually we tried that 3 different ways. We tried giving them just the same amount of points each day. So if it were a 3-day course, Monday, Wednesday, Friday course, we tried giving them 2 points each day, or 3 points each day, let's say. And we gave them, each time they showed up, they got that amount of points. We also tried increasing it so that it was 1 point for the first time they showed up, 2 points for the second time they showed up that week, and 3 times for the third time. Meaning that if they showed up for all 3 days, they could earn 7 points. And if they only showed up for 2 days, then they would gain 3 points. Does that make sense to everybody? So then the way that they made those rewards was increasing. We also went as far as to do 1, 2, 4, and that one has produced a pretty remarkable jump in their attendance so far. So we're seeing that idea of a geometric reward with attendance does seem to make a difference. Another thing you want to give them with gamification is loot, some kind of an item. Now this is something that's not really well researched, but I think it may be one of the really untapped ore of gamification, which is that we want to make the course itself a strategic thing. So in our programming course, we gave them an item once they completed a particular milestone that we identified, and the name of the item was called the Pearl of Wisdom. So with the Pearl of Wisdom, they could use it one of 2 different ways. They could either activate it, and then for 1 week, any assignments that they completed during that time were bumped up by 10%, or they could use it a single time on one assignment, and it would bump that by 25%. And they had to identify this before they took that particular assignment. So the behavior that we're trying to encourage with that particular item is that if they do the 1 week, the idea is that they suddenly become very motivated to push a lot of assignment at once. But because truly, most people tend to learn or do any kind of job in spurts, right? I mean, we don't do things always in a very progressive and slow, methodical way. And this is meant to encourage them to really buckle down and to get ahead by studying a lot of material at once. And then just in general, also to cater to their learning styles, because that way the students can decide when they want to apply themselves the most. It's just a matter of trying to take the privileges that students already want in a course and make those tantalizing baubles that we can put at particular milestones to draw them to complete them. So to make the course itself strategic, but also to have rewards that are dangling out there on our quest path or our learning map that's pulling students to it. Multiplayer, I mentioned before, we did not do this in the particular course that I'm researching right now because it doesn't lend itself well to multiple people working on the same problems. But I think that that is a really useful approach in the right course. So what has happened in this particular course that we've studied now for 4 semesters? One is that students actually ask questions in class a lot more than they used to. And the part that shocked me was how much they would study outside of class. When they would have, level 2 assignments that would be up to 2 or 3 weeks ahead of where we were, they actually went onto YouTube or Wikipedia or actually cracked open a textbook, if you can believe it, to find out how to complete that particular challenge. So we were hoping that we were hitting the right balance between pleasantly frustrating because they were reaching ahead of where they currently were, but not so far ahead they couldn't see level 4, level 5, extremely difficult assignments, so that they became frustrated that they would never be able to learn that. So other things that have happened, just a little bit of quantitative here, is that students tended to drop later. We attribute this largely to the fact that we use XP rather than grades, which just means that, again, their scores are always increasing, which gives students a sense of progress in progress, so they tend to stay in the course longer. It did lead to a higher success rate. On the downside, it could also lead to students staying in a course earlier, longer than they should. And we hope that the leaderboard helps to cancel that out to some degree, because then they would be able to tell, even though their points are always going up, they are near the bottom of, let's say, the 20 students, and that should give them some sense. Student attendance, this was a really good one that came with the geometric and the greater than linear rewards, is that the amount of attendance for students bumped up considerably, 4 days. And as you can imagine, an average of 4 days of students actually there and attending, can make a difference. So that's a good thing. And a small matter, but still, each semester there are certain students who have a great aptitude and are ready to move on, and they're able to complete the course. I've had a student complete our 15-week semester in as little as 4 weeks because they had some aptitude before and they were able to move ahead. Okay, so just a few other things here. We did give them some web surveys after the course. These were the results for those. So these were, relatively good results here so far. We're pretty happy with what we're seeing. Perhaps the most interesting bit is on the next page, though. I think this question, I would like to have leaderboard or have whatever item in my future courses, is a really good question to ask, because it says that's something they actually can have in the next course. There's no reason they can't ask their other instructors here at this university and other universities to simply add that block, because like I said, it only takes a few seconds. And almost unanimously, they said that they would like to have that in their future courses. So what else is coming out here? We're trying to improve the blocks that we have, and also we're using the blocks that Blackboard is making internally, which are, again, very high quality. We're trying to make sure that the blocks work together to produce a blended result, which is better than the sum of their parts. And also we want to collect more data, because we want to see whether this is really working, whether it makes enough of a difference to be worth the extra effort, and that's something that's still in work. Okay, so I think that I've covered all the content that I have here. I'll be glad to take any questions here, and I believe there's already some popped up here on the chat box.
Hi, David. This is Scott. Yes, we've had 3 questions come up.
Okay.
And from Sky, he is asking if you have a Twitter handle.
I do not. I'm sorry to tell you. I don't have one yet.
Okay. And then Carolyn would like to know, in the leaderboard block, what data is populating the chart, and where is that data being pulled from?
Yeah, Carolyn, good question. Right now, because we wanted to make it as plug and play as possible, it is simply going to the Grade Center and grabbing the total column and using that. However, in the new version that we'll be putting out in January, you will be able to pick which column of the grade book you want to use to represent the length of that, as well as some tabs for saying who is the top student this week, who's the top student this month, who's the top student overall.
Great. And then Michelle would like to know, was this research conducted on a blended classroom or online classroom?
Yeah, okay, so this one is blended. This one is, I guess, what some people call a hybrid course. We do meet, we do have the standard in-class meetings, but they also do labs, and there's a certain amount of virtual content. So it's primarily in person, although we have done a little bit of putting our toes into the water with doing this with graduate courses, which are totally online, and have found, with the small data that we have, positive results so far.
Thank you. Those were the 3 questions that came up during your presentation.
Okay, I see a new one popping up here from Matthew. Yeah, okay, so Matthew, that we have had that multiple times so far. I think I've had about 5 of those. And in each case, the only thing that is scheduled about our course are the exams themselves. And even those are a little on the flexible side, which some people may disagree with. So for our assignments, they can complete any assignment from level 1 to whatever level they can see on day 1 or until the very last day. So let's say they've ascended all the way to level 4. They can take anything from level 4, level 3, level 2, level 1, even until the very last day if they wanted to bump up a few more points. So they might have a level 1 assignment that they had 18 out of 20 on, let's say. They can still get those extra 2 points even on the very last day. So what that means, Matthew, is that once they get enough points to ascend to the next level, we put exams right at about where we expect the breaking point to be from level 1 to level 2, level 2 to level 3. So then once they've completed all the level 1 assignments, they're ready for exam 1. So if we have a student who meets that goal ahead of the time of the actual exam, we will oftentimes give them that exam or allow them to take that exam whenever they want. Now that does mean that there's a certain challenge in that you're going to have different versions of your test or use pools, because you don't want that particular student to sell that information to the other students, right? Okay. Okay, so yeah. Thank you, Jarl, for go ahead and answering that next question. So if you just look up, in fact, if you just Google Ocelot and Leaderboard, or Google Ocelot and QuestPath, or even my name or the word Gamagogy along with that, then you will find links to these.
Great. Thank you, David, for your wonderful presentation. And everyone can continue to ask questions. We're going to quickly move. Jarl Jonas is going to give a quick overview of the achievements demo. Jarl is a director of course sites and also in our product management team here at Blackboard. So he's going to give a quick overview for the next few minutes. Jarl? And your screen is loading, just so you know that we can see it. And Jarl, not sure if you started talking. If you have, we don't have any audio.
Hi, Lauren. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for allowing me to join today, and thanks for reminding me to take myself off mute. I appreciate that. Yeah, so I was just going to use a couple of resources that are also available to everyone here on our help.blackboard.com site, and just take a quick peek into a course environment in which we have some badges released or created to give you a bit of the sense of the process, and then just leave you with a couple of resources that you can go ahead and utilize after today to get started. So just to preface the achievements feature, the achievements feature actually did come out of some of the work that we did very early on with Mozilla and just some of our own research into the direction a lot of what David was talking about today in terms of adding some game mechanics into the learning environment. So this is one of our first steps into that process. And achievements was something that came out also a little bit from our work with some institutions as they were offering open courses on our CourseSites platform. So we worked quite closely with the Mozilla organization during their beta of what was what is called the Open Badges Initiative. And in talking with them and talking with other institutions about what they're looking to do, we decided to go ahead and focus on really increasing the transparency into the learning milestones, and particularly the progress of those milestones when thinking about the achievements feature, as well as how do we motivate and model learning behavior? How do we let the students know what is expected of them to obtain those achievements? And then how can we allow the students to provide evidence of their learning even beyond the learning management system? So as you can see what I have here, just a quick diagram of the overview of the achievements feature is the ability for you as instructors to go ahead and create ways for students to obtain rewards. And so achievements is the overall feature. Within the achievements feature are the ability to create rules utilizing the adaptive release framework for students to be able to earn these, I guess they're being called micro-credentials, or the two rewards that we've chosen to offer to start out with are certificates and badges. And then be able to go ahead and share that, again, externally to the system. Well, I think it's great to have that reward shown within the platform, perhaps within their e-portfolios, or just within the course itself. As David showed, just knowing what they're earning and how they get to compare against others are earning, but also then to be able to share that more broadly as badges are being more and more widely accepted as, again, a micro-credential, evidence that I've obtained a particular skill or set of knowledge. So if I come quickly into a course, I can show you that we just finished up, actually we're finishing up a badges MOOC that we've run in cooperation with the Mozilla organization, as well as a couple of other entities. And I'll leave you with that URL in the chat so you can go ahead and come in and see some of the recordings and the conversation and the challenges that we've created. But in the course, hopefully you can see I've switched over. When you have the achievements building block installed, and it will be soon unbundled with our upcoming service pack, you'll see an achievements feature within your course control panel. And in there, you'll see I have a couple of created now. I have mostly badges in the course. You'll have the badge image that once you've uploaded, and we start you off with a few, or you are able to upload your own, along with an initial description of what it takes to earn that badge. And what we see here as instructors is very similar to what the students would see, except they get some categorization about what they've earned, what they have yet to earn, and then what else in the course in terms of certificates and badges are able to be obtained. So as I scroll down here, you can see you can create as many as you'd like. And each of these rely on different sets of rules. So we built this really relying on the underlying adaptive release framework, I believe, which David mentioned as well. And this allows you to perhaps offer a badge for participating in a certain number of discussion boards, and if you go ahead and review and want to increase participation there, you can have students vote for each other who are the best supporters in the course, and go ahead and offer a badge for that. Or you can have it be much more competency-based and have them go ahead and obtain a badge like we did in the course by completing certain challenges or certain assessments or assignments. But we actually had a blend of all of those here in the course, where the storyteller badge was something where, as we were reviewing challenges about creating badge systems, these were individuals that we thought we would recognize who were creating the best user stories and asking them to share their user stories with others. And you can see our participation badge is something that we really wanted to encourage group participation, discussion board participation, and had a good amount of the recipients. So as an instructor, I also have an easy view into who's received that. Just to since this is a real course, I'm not going to click that to show the list to keep these private, but you'll see if I click that open, it'll open up a new window with the students who have actually obtained the badge. So I have a pretty good way of seeing who have obtained the badges and the level of activity there as well. The kinds of badges that you can create are a course completion badge, or I'm sorry, a reward, I should say, or achievement, course completion achievement, which would allow you to go ahead and issue a certificate, or as well as a corresponding badge if you'd like. A milestone, which is an interim achievement within the course that you can either assign a badge to, as well as a custom. And this could be a combination of a variety of different things if you'd like. And just with adaptive release, you can go ahead and combine rules and criteria to make sure that if you want students to complete more than one thing or either or, that you can go ahead and assign multiple rules and multiple criteria to the particular achievement so that you can really create your own learning paths as well as your own means of obtaining these rewards. And as the students are going ahead and receiving these, just I know we're running out of time, the students can go ahead and store these within the Mozilla Open Badge Backpack. And again, this gives them the ability to more broadly display the evidence of their achievements. And then the achievements using the Open Badge framework that Mozilla have created link back to the course and the objectives and the evidence that are tied to those badges. So there's really not the ability to create or copy with, to really keep the credibility of the badge in place. Mozilla's worked quite hard to make sure that that is intact. So our connection with the learning management system and the Open Badge framework is pretty seamless when the students go through that experience. So I'll come back and just share a couple of URLs with you that you can go ahead and use in terms of a couple of the things that I've mentioned to you. Before we go ahead and close, I'll go ahead and put the badge MOOC so you can go ahead and review that course. There's no www in front of that. And then for those of you who are familiar with, we have the help.blackboard.com site, which I use to show you that initial diagram. And that will go ahead and give you the ability to see the exact process of how to go ahead and create and manage your achievements from an instructor perspective, and the students have access to the same information within the help info area as well. So I'll go ahead and stop there. I know that we have a few minutes left and want to make sure there's any last thoughts that David or Lauren or Scott want to provide, but there's enough time to do so. So thanks so much for your time and attention today.
Great, thank you, girl. And we are running very close to the top of the hour. So if you still have questions for David, feel free to put them into the chat. I can also follow up with him directly if we're not able to answer them, because I know a few of our presenters today have to leave directly at 2 p.m. And one follow-up question for you, Jarl. What service pack do the schools need to install achievements?
Great question. Yes, as Julie mentioned, it is to install the building block, it would be Service Pack 12 and higher, and it will be bundled with the forthcoming Service Pack 14.
Great, thank you, Jarl. And a big thank you to everyone who was able to attend our gamification presentation today presented by David Thornton from Jacksonville State University. Just a reminder that this webinar has been recorded, and we will send out a recording along with David's presentation slides and all of these links about achievements tomorrow, so look forward to that email. And if you have another meeting, feel free to drop off. Otherwise, I'll hang around for another minute or two. Thank you all.